Welcome back to Old School Sports and our Out of the Park Baseball 24 playthrough of the Buffalo Wings. It is July 1st, 2030, and the 2030 season thus far has been a bit disappointing for the Wings. We are tied with the Braves for the third and fourth wild card spots in the National League. So if the season were to end today, we'd be in the playoffs. So it has not been a complete disaster. That said, though, we're 43 and 40 at this point, tied with the Braves, 11 games behind the Mets in the National League East, and we're certainly expecting to be more competitive with this win now team. Definitely focused on trying to win this year. We've been in the playoffs each of the last two seasons, and the goal is certainly to get back to the playoffs this year and hopefully do some damage once we're there. So as we approach the trade deadline over this month of July, we're going to be working on trying to improve this team. And I do appreciate all of the comments since our last episode as I begin recording this about a little less than a day and a half after we posted the last episode. There's over 30 comments there. So to Three Quarters Badger's point, I do try to take as much of the comments from viewers into account when moving on to the next episode. Sometimes we have a fair amount of time for comments like we just did. Sometimes if I don't ask for comments explicitly, it's kind of because I know that I'm going to be filming or recording the next episode in short order. But in this case, definitely had a chance to get a lot of feedback from the viewers of the past episode, and I do appreciate that. So going to spend a few minutes here at the start of the episode just going through some of the feedback and my thoughts around it. And Jackhammer Possessor made the point that he thinks we should consider moving on from Adley Rutschman or Marcelo Meyer in relatively short order. And his point was just with the payroll that we're going to have with the Buffalo Wings, we can maybe afford one or two big payroll guys, certainly not the three that we have today. And I think that that is good feedback and fair feedback. My hope over the last couple seasons has been that our budget would be expanded because of our success on the field, and that really hasn't happened. So we are kind of topped out in what we can do in terms of salary at this point. And when we look at that 2031 season, right now we're looking at another $23-24 million in terms of payroll next year as some guys' numbers go up and arbitration eligible players start making more money. So we are definitely in a situation where next year trying to get a Rutschman or a Meyer or perhaps even an Ohtani off the books would be an easy way to get us back on sides as far as our salary situation, assuming that we don't get a boost to our budget. So I think the feedback from Jackhammer Possessor is accurate and fair in that context. I'm not going to make a move right now, though, because we are in win now mode and we've got a budget set up where we have a tiny bit of financial flexibility right now. We may get a little more with some trades that we make, but since we're in win now mode, as much as I think that feedback is accurate, and I've probably overplayed my hand a little bit in terms of big contracts with this team, I feel like it's something that I can potentially look at and address in this coming off season, and don't want to offload one of the key players on our team quite yet, since we still are trying to win it this year. And one of the other things I spent a lot of time thinking about in the last episode, and I've gotten a ton of feedback on from the viewers, is what to do in center field. I've been talking for a while how Vance Honeycutt is not an ideal defensive center fielder. Would certainly love the range to be, in a perfect world, at least 10 points higher, but even if it was just 5 points higher, would feel a little better about him out there. And he could certainly use a stronger arm. His bat has been excellent ever since he came up to the majors. So my goal is not to get him out of the lineup entirely, but to potentially move him to left, upgrade defensively in left field, and pick up a center fielder who can upgrade us defensively in center field. And went through a few options that we were thinking about in the last episode. I had kind of moved on from Drew Jones, but Magic brought up the point that given that the price for him was lower and it was going to be someone like Jace Young rather than a top prospect to get the deal done, perhaps it was something we should think about. And I'm not going to do Drew Jones just because he is due about $10 million next year, so he would only exacerbate the salary issues. Even getting Young off the books, we're still going to be $5 million ish worse than we are right now if we brought on Drew Jones. I also don't love the idea of having a fragile center fielder in Drew Jones, given that we already have a fragile shortstop in Marcelo Meyer. Can't remember who brought up this point in the comments, but I think it was definitely an interesting one. So I'm not going to go down that route, Magic. But the other thing that I did want to share is that Jace Young is certainly not an exceptional player. You can see his bat has been about replacement level, and he's been about a win over replacement over the course of the season. He is a pretty average offensive third baseman and a average-ish to perhaps even little bit below average defensive third baseman. So I get the feedback that I've gotten, why did you trade for this guy? Feel free to get rid of him. I do get that, and I just don't have a replacement that's adequate in the system right now to be able to deal him. And when we do look at his ratings, 55 contact, 55 home run power, 60 I, and 50 defensive third baseman, doesn't sound all that incredible. But when you look at him in the context of what's actually out there, he's not horrible. And to that point, when I do a search for a third baseman with 50 defense who's got at a minimum the same contact power and eye as Jace Young, there's only 5 guys in all of baseball who have those numbers. And when you look at what he's accomplished this year, Young has a higher WAR than Jake Geloff, and he's got a higher WAR than Andres Alvarez. And Kenny Lavari and Gunnar Henderson are guys making huge money that would cost us a ton in terms of prospects and weakening our major league roster to bring on board. So I hear you guys, and I agree that Jace Young, even though we do have the Nationals keeping 30% of his contract for these next couple seasons, so he's only going to be $5.5 million the next 2 years each season, may not be the long-term answer. But as a win-now team, I just don't think there's an adequate replacement either in our farm system or that we're going to be able to pick up in trade who's going to give us what we think he's going to give us this year. And I'm realistic that what I'm hoping to get from him is just a bit above average in terms of his bat. And if I get average defense, I would be very content with that. And I know that that's not the most exciting player to have on the team, but if it helps fill the black hole that our offense at third base has been at times over the past couple of seasons, I view that as still being progress. So I'm going to keep Young around this year. Could he be on the trade block this offseason? Absolutely. But I don't think here on July 1st that there's any realistic path for us to maintain what he's giving us at that position with a trade that we'd be able to actually pull off. So I'm going to keep him on board, and unfortunately that means Drew Jones, for that reason and for some of the other reasons I talked about earlier, isn't going to be on our radar anymore as a potential center fielder. We got feedback from Fake Name and Andrew Gratton to not go to Drew Jones and to consider including Ali Ostendorf, who's one of the top prospects in our system, as a potential guy to bring on a center fielder. And the center fielder that some of those guys talked about that I'm still very interested in is John Featherston. He's only a 60 in center field, has been pointed out in the comment section. And I agree. Ideally, I'd want someone who's 65, 70, 75, or maybe even 80 in center field. But range to me is the most important trait for a center fielder. It's not going to matter what your error rating or your arm are if you can't get to the ball in the first place. And he is a 70 in range. And he's durable, unlike Drew Jones. So he is one of the guys who is still in the mix for me to try to pick up with perhaps a trade centered around Ostendorf, who was picked second overall by us just 3 years ago. Still one of the top 70 prospects in baseball. But he hasn't done much in rookie ball or Class A ball. I guess if you look over his last 4 stops, his ERA has been dropping from the 8s to the 7s to the 6s to the mid-5s this year. But he still has walked 55 batters and 75 and a third innings pitched. He's closing in on 22 years old, and his control is still at 25. So I am getting worried that he's just going to always walk too many batters to be effective at the major league level. So from that perspective, I am willing to consider parting with Ali in a trade if it helps us win now, because I just am not 100% convinced that he's going to be able to help us win in the future. And on the idea of feedback around Ostendorf and honestly Jace Young, Stanley Rosella kind of brought up the point also that kind of aligns with my thinking that Ostendorf may not be the guy, and we probably need to keep Jace Young for this year since we are trying to be a win-now team. So I think that feedback makes sense to me as well. And 2 other final pieces of feedback that we're thinking about as we try to figure out center field. Sakruth brought up the point to maybe not just bail on Derek Curiel. He is a very strong defensive center fielder, obviously. Worry about the bat a little bit, although it's been pretty productive this season. We have made another offer on him in addition to an offer on Featherston, and we'll be kind of sharing what we hear from the teams on the other sides of those potential trades with all of you in the upcoming moments of this episode. And one other thing that was brought up by Patrick DeBonis was Jay Allen II, and it turns out that he's actually on the trading block right now. Another guy I'm not totally sure about his bat, although he has been reasonably productive the last few years. Don't like that he's fragile, making a ton of money, but he is a free agent, so it's not a long-term commitment. Brings a lot to the table defensively, has some speed. Certainly some things to be said about him. Now, you say you didn't go to Drew Jones because of the fragility. Why are you considering Jay Allen? And fair question. And the 2 things I would say why we might think about Jay Allen. One, the offer I've made for him is potentially giving up less than for any of the other guys, so he would be a lot less costly. But still, certainly having a fragile center fielder is not optimal, to use one of my catchphrases. But the other thing about Jay Allen compared to Drew Jones is that it's not a long-term commitment. He's a free agent at the end of this year. So he'll be off the books. Obviously, that will leave us with a hole in center field to potentially fill if we bring him on board. But if we're able to get him at a discount price compared to the likes of Curiel or Featherston, it might be something for us to think about. So those are kind of the 3 offers that I have outstanding right now as the month of July begins. And we'll see if perhaps in the next week or 2 of game time, we can figure out some changes to perhaps improve our center field situation, perhaps improve our budgetary situation, and hopefully set this team up for an ability over the second half of the season to make a run at the Mets and the Nationals and Braves in this NL East division. And we've got our responses back on all three of those trades. So we got a no way, and almost, and a no way. Kansas City, we had offered Luca Reyes and Ali Ostendorf, which would get the deal done, I believe, straight up for Curiel. But we felt like, given his less than optimal offense, we wanted them to also throw in a minor league pitcher, Damian Jimenez. Looks like he could be a pretty interesting bullpen arm. And we also wanted them to throw in some cash. So we definitely got a little greedy there. We'll have to see what the other offers look like as to how much more we need to give before deciding which direction to go. Arizona, all we did was offer Luca Reyes for Jay Allen II. And as I mentioned, we wanted them to retain every penny. We could get the deal done with them, but we'd have to give up Humberto Duque, who is the best prospect in our organization, number 38 overall, the 18-year-old making his debut in rookie ball this year. Only hitting .213, and he's striking out in about half of his at-bats. So he's got a lot of work to do, but still is potentially an interesting bat. For a 3-month rental, I feel like that price is a little bit high. So I'm hoping this Atlanta reaction, where we're almost, is a path worth going down, and the almost is not a big-time prospect or a big-time player who almost gets us there. And I had offered Ali Ostendorf. We talked about he's one of the top prospects in our system, but I am getting worried about his long-term ability to contribute, as well as Luca Reyes for Featherston, who would improve us defensively in center field, and over the course of his major league career has been a slightly above average hitter. And then we would also get Isidro Ochoa. You may remember him. He's a pitcher that we looked at in the draft a couple of years ago at this point. Didn't take him in the first round when we had the opportunity, and he ended up going a little bit after we picked. He's been pretty productive in rookie ball the last couple years. I don't think he's as highly regarded a prospect as Ostendorf, but he's not a bad replacement. So I really like that trade. The question is, what do we have to add in to get it done? And you can see, Andrew Painter, Harleen Susanna, two very important starting pitchers for us. Takao Ota, our first baseman. Tyreek Hardage, one of the better prospects in our system. Jorge Carrillo, one of the better pitching prospects who's close to major league ready. Tim Hull, infielder that's moving up through our organization and could be able to contribute soon. Joe Edwards, who's a little behind Hull in terms of his development as a middle infielder, but still a decent prospect. But then it does look like Kerry Carpenter, who's in high A ball for us this year. Just one of those guys that we brought on board to help our teams play a lot better. You can see we signed him at the end of spring training when he was unemployed, and he's had a monster year in high A ball, hitting over .350 with 29 homers and 70 ribbies through 279 at-bats, but doesn't have a profile that he's going to be a big contributor at the major league level for us at this point. So although it will hurt our high A ball team, I'm willing to include Carpenter to get this deal done. I don't know if I would have included any of the other guys. They are all much more painful to potentially get rid of for me, but a 32-year-old guy who we just have as minor league depth, we're getting the center fielder we want in Featherston, and we're getting them to retain all of his contract. Featherston for Reyes to me is a slam dunk. Had high hopes for Reyes this year. We gave him the job in left field, and he just didn't really deliver, and he hasn't done much since we demoted him to Albany. I mean, he does have 5 homers and 17 ribbies and 90 at-bats, so I guess it's unfair to say he hasn't done much, but he's also struck out in over of a third of his at-bats and is hitting just 211. So Reyes, I would certainly give up straight up for Featherston. I think Reyes is still potentially a better offensive player with that home run power that he does have, but Featherston more speed, better defensively. And then Ostendorf, the fact that he's a higher regarded prospect. As I said, he's still viewed as one of the top 100 prospects in the game. And you look at his arsenal, and his cutter and his splitter are major league ready, and his curve and his changeup aren't too far off. And he's also potentially got a knuckle curve. He's got potential to have above average stuff and well above average movement. But that control really scares me. But the fact that we're still going to get a decent starting pitching prospect in Ochoa in return makes me feel better about letting go of Ostendorf. Ochoa is a little bit younger. He's at least improved his control a bit. The stuff with Ochoa is the concern. But his fastball, his sinker, and his cutter at 20 years old are already not that far off major league quality. And unlike Ostendorf, he's actually been pretty successful in rookie ball. I think he's probably ready to go right to A ball. If they both completely develop, I think Ostendorf is a higher ceiling pitcher, but I question whether Ostendorf is going to completely develop at this point. And if he can't get that control from the 25 that it's basically been at ever since he was drafted 3+ years ago up to at least a 40, I just think he's almost an unusable pitcher, even though he's potentially got nasty stuff and really good movement on his pitches. He's just going to walk so many batters. It's going to be brutal. So the fact that I get the upgrade at center field that I'm looking for with Featherston, and I get a good, solid starting pitching prospect. Again, not the same type of ceiling as Ostendorf, I don't think. But I think this is a trade that I have to do if I can just add in Kerry Carpenter and get it done. So we're going to add Kerry Carpenter into the deal. Our assistant GM does not like it. But we're getting an upgrade defensively in center field with a guy who, over the course of his career, has at least proven to be a major league average bat, and a major league average bat with hopefully 70 outfield range, making him a plus defensive center fielder, a little bit of speed on the base paths, and durability to be out there almost every day for us, I think is pretty valuable. And then we're also going to have an upgrade in left field with moving Honeycutt over there. And we still get a decent pitching prospect with Ochoa, who's a little younger than Ostendorf. I hate to bail on Ali. Always hurts to let go of somebody that you took number 2 overall, because you're kind of admitting it was a bad pick and it didn't work out. But Reyes for Featherstone to me is a slam dunk. I don't care about giving up Kerry Carpenter. And as I said, Ostendorf for Ochoa is probably a little bit of a downgrade if they both develop completely. But I don't have a lot of confidence right now that Ostendorf's going to develop completely. And at least Ochoa gives me a prospect who could be a major league starting pitcher in our system, which is kind of all Ostendorf is at this point. So we are going to go ahead, complete that big trade, and the fans not pleased that Reyes is gone, but the fans slightly happy that Featherston is with us. Don't know why Reyes was so popular. We still have 100 fan interest, so we're still pretty strong in fan interest. But the big move is done. Now I need to figure out a way to get our new center fielder, John Featherston, onto the Major League roster. So we're going to be tweaking some other things to fit him on board. But the big trade that we've been talking about is complete. And with the fact that they kept Featherston's contract, we still have a little bit of money to potentially spend as we continue to move through towards the trade deadline in about a month. And we are going to send down Toshimitsu Kato, who has been a backup infielder for us this year. Love his glove, but he's hitting a buck 59 and just question whether he's ever going to be good enough to hit at the major league level. You can see that, according to our scout at least, still potential for his contact, his eye to get a little bit better. And at least we'll be giving him everyday playing time down in Albany. We kept Easton Swafford instead, who's only hitting a little better with a buck 75 average, is not as good defensively, but he's the only captain personality we've got on the team right now. We've kind of painted ourselves into a corner with our reliance on Swafford to kind of maintain harmony in the locker room and the dugout. Clearly finding a captain with more ability next off season is something we should probably focus on. But for the time being, at least, that's what keeps Swafford on the roster. It'll definitely be a downgrade for him defensively at second and short compared to what we were getting from Kato. But if we obviously have a long-term injury to a Seifu or to a Marcelo Meyer, Kato would likely come back up and be the starter despite his defensive efficiencies. But at the very least, we will get him some regular playing time in Albany at this point, and that will allow Featherston to come onto our roster as our starting center fielder. And that'll allow us, as we've talked about, to move Mr. Honeycutt to left field, and that will require some adjustment in how we're using the Rule 5 acquisition. Rafael Radillo, Nick York, and Jace Barofin. Those guys will have their playing time impacted a bit with the addition of Featherston. But right now, I think you can count on Featherston and Honeycutt playing just about every day. The other three guys will be fighting for time at a corner outfield position and or DH and first base. And with Featherston on board, we'll take a look at what our lineup looks like. I really like it against right-handers. Seifu at second, Meyer at short, Rutschman at catcher, Basalo the DH, Honeycutt now in left, Oda at first, Young at third, Featherston at center, and Barofin in right. I feel like we've got some defensive deficiencies against left-handed pitching in our lineup. Seifu and Meyer back in second and short. We're going to play Honeycutt in right. We've got to play Basalo at first base instead of DH to get Tanner Shillette some at-bats as a DH. Rutschman at catcher. York in left field is not optimal. Featherston drops to ninth in the order. Jace Young still seventh in the order at third base. Don't feel like they're at critical defensive positions, but we are weaker with Basalo at first base than we are with Oda at first. We are weaker with York in left field than we are with Honeycutt in left, and we are weaker in right field with Honeycutt in right than we are with Barofin in right. So strong up the middle with Seifu, Meyer, Rutschman, and Featherston in both lineups, but do feel like we may be pushing the envelope a little bit against left-handed pitching to ensure that the right-handed hitters on our team, Seifu, Honeycutt, York, and Shillette, are all in the starting lineup, along with switch hitter Rutschman against left-handed pitchers. Our performance against left-handed pitching was an issue for us last year. This year we are 12-9, so we're actually better against left-handed pitching than we are against right-handed pitching, but certainly acknowledge that we are perhaps leaving a little bit to be desired in terms of our defensive ability against left-handed pitching. Fortunately, as you can see, we've faced left-handed starting pitchers in 25% of our games, facing right-handers in 75% of our games. So getting things right against right-handers will ultimately probably be more important when all is said and done. And clearly we can make some moves to improve that defense when we're playing against left-handed pitchers if it just starts not working out. And obviously, as I've talked about, we've got almost the full month of July till we get to the trade deadline. I don't think we're going to do anything else immediately. I feel like the upgrade in center field hopefully will help our defensive efficiency and zone rating start moving in the right direction. Fifth in the National League in runs scored is fine. It's been our pitching staff that's been a disappointment. 11th in runs allowed, and our starting has been fine. It's our bullpen that's been the problem. So hopefully, better defense in center field and left field, at least against right-handed pitching, will help us. Hopefully, it'll help improve our defensive ratings and also potentially help our bullpen. But clearly, as we get closer to the trade deadline, if those things aren't happening or they aren't happening dramatically enough, perhaps looking for a arm to help us in the back of the bullpen would be the other potential avenue for us to explore in the coming weeks. And I guess the initial returns on having Featherston in the lineup are positive. We won 4 of our first 5 games with him. 4-game winning streak just snapped against the Braves. But we took a series against the Marlins, took a series against the Braves as we head into the All-Star break. So taking a look at the standings now, still tied with the Braves, but 9 back at this point. And we are tied with the Braves, half a game up on the 4th and final wild card spot. So made a small amount of progress in the first week of July thus far. Basallo still tied for the league lead in homers, Seifu leading the league in steals, and Adley Rutschman quietly improving this season, has the 3rd best OPS in the National League at this point. So getting some important production out of 3 of the top offensive players on our team. Taking a look at the pitching staff here at the All-Star break, and still no leaders, nobody in the top 3 of the leaderboards in any of the key categories from our Buffalo Wings pitching staff. So let's take a look and find out who made the All-Star team from our squad. Pitching-wise, Shohei Ohtani, perennial All-Star, only a 5-5 record, but a 3.39 ERA. Taking a look at the other stats, he's not striking out quite as many batters as he used to, 87 in 93 innings, but his ERA is fine. His whip is respectable. Sierra of 3.47, up almost a run from a year ago. You can see his ERA plus is better than it was a year ago, but his FIP minus has deteriorated rather materially. Looks like he's going to be more of a 3.5 or 4 WAR pitcher this year than the big 6.2 number he put up a year ago, but still a very useful pitcher for us for the perennial All-Star. And it looks like he's our only All-Star pitcher this year. Once again, we technically have 2 catchers named All-Star, although Samuel Basallo is a All-Star as a designated hitter once again this year. He's having a even better year than he's had his previous seasons, hitting .260 with 26 homers and 57 ribbies so far. He's won a Silver Slugger each of his first 2 seasons, as we talked about, just named to an All-Star team for the 2nd time. He was the Rookie of the Year in 2028, and his 135 OPS plus and WRC plus are both on pace to be the best in his career. And Rutschman, of course, is the starting catcher for the National League. 286, 20 homers, 20 doubles, 13 homers, that 922 OPS as we talked about. The type of offense we were hoping and dreaming from Rutschman when we brought him on board, with a WRC plus of close to 150, 3.4 WAR. Love the defense that he is giving us at catcher. Interesting that it does not look like Deshaun Seifu is an All-Star this year at second base. So there were 4 second basemen named to the All-Star team in the National League, and Deshaun Seifu was not one of them. Shortstop Marcelo Meyer, All-Star for the first time in his career. Hitting .284 for us, 9 homers, 41 ribbies, well above average offensively, and a good, solid defensive shortstop for us. Just want to ensure that we keep him healthy. Our new left fielder, Vance Honeycutt, makes an All-Star team. have talked about his consistency in the past, hitting 289 this year, 17 homers at the All-Star break. Love a guy like this in the lineup who just puts up well above average production and very consistent production season after season for us, and think that hopefully he'll be a little better fit in the outfield as a left fielder than he was as a center fielder. But the big omission is Deshaun Seifu, who last time we checked in on him, obviously we checked in recently and saw that he continues to lead the National League in steals. But last time we had checked in on him, his batting average was a little lower than it had been in previous seasons, and that's certainly the situation now, hitting 271. But he does have 31 doubles and 5 triples at the All-Star break, league-leading 41 stolen bases. A bit above average in terms of his offensive abilities. A little bit of a surprise. He was an All-Star each of the last 2 seasons. He's been a Gold Glove winner each of the last 2 seasons. And he's led the league in triples 3 years in a row, stolen bases 2 years in a row, trying to go for 3. And his 58 runs scored, I am sure, is one of the higher figures in the National League, but I guess he got caught in a numbers game among the second basemen in the NL this year as far as who would make the All-Star team. And with those 58 runs scored, Seifu obviously not in the top 5, just kind of out of the top 5, but you can see a lot of familiar names there with Alonso, Michael Harris II, Joel Nelson, James Wood, and Fernando Tatis Jr. Among the top run scorers in the National League. So he wasn't quite as high as I thought he might be, but still definitely a bit surprising to me to not have Seifu on the All-Star team. But it is what it is. He's third in the league in triples, second in the league in doubles, fourth in at-bats, and obviously leading the league in homers, or stolen bases, although he is leading the league in caught stealing this year. Actually surprised that 9 leads the league in caught stealing. Seems like that number could be a little bit higher. So he hasn't been quite as efficient on the base paths this year as previous seasons, but still a bit of a surprise to me that a guy who's leading the league in steals and is right near the top of the leaderboard in doubles and triples and runs, coming off of 2 straight All-Star seasons and 2 straight Gold Glove seasons, didn't get the love from the voters this year. And Marcelo Meyer, in his first time in the All-Star game, all he did was win All-Star MVP for us. The first time we've had that in this playthrough. Go back to see exactly what he ended up doing for us. 2 for 2 with a run scored and a run batted in, solo home run. So doesn't take much to be the MVP of a 3-2 win in the All-Star game, because the pitchers presumably did not go that long. No pitcher went more than an inning. So Marcelo Meyer is our All-Star game MVP here in the 2030 season. And it was an abbreviated week with the All-Star game, but still a 3-1 record for our Wings coming out of the All-Star break. Took 3 out of 4 against Washington at home. Going on the road now against Pittsburgh, Baltimore, and Milwaukee for most of the rest of the month before we finish up with the Dodgers and the Cardinals. But the Wings are definitely playing our best baseball of the year here in the month of July. We're tied for second now in the National League with the Nationals rather than the Braves, 8 games behind the Mets, and we are tied with the Nationals for the top 2 wild card spots at this point in the National League. So team is definitely playing a little better. Let's see if we can keep that momentum going on this road trip we've got ahead of us. And unfortunately, the road trip's been a bit of a challenge. We did take 2 out of 3 in Pittsburgh, we split 2 out of 4 in Pittsburgh, and then we got swept by Baltimore 3 games there. So taking a little bit of a dip in the standings. We're now alone in the third place, 9.5 out, game and a half up on the final wild card spot. Certainly getting swept by a struggling Orioles team that's in 7th place in the AL East was not the way we wrote things up. But now we will get a shot at the Milwaukee Brewers, who are not much better than them. Hopefully we can at least take 2 out of 3 against them on the road. You can see our fan interest has deteriorated a little bit. We've been playing pretty good, obviously not so much over the last 4 or 5 days, but it's been a pretty good season and a pretty competitive team on the field in Buffalo. So definitely disappointing that our fan interest is regressing as we head into the heat of the pennant race. And obviously, it's been a small sample size since we made those moves. Really only 3 weeks of action interrupted by the All-Star break. But we'll take a look and see what the team statistics look like. Actually, we're down to 9-8 in July after losing 4 in a row after that good start. So July's really not going as well as it was those first couple weeks. Tied for 5th in runs scored, so really no change in our offense. Runs allowed, we've improved to 8th. The bullpen ERA now ranks 13th, but most importantly, we're better in terms of our runs allowed, defensive efficiency, and zone rating. Not really any material moves. I think the efficiency might be a little better, but zone rating might be a little worse, but still not good in either of those. Didn't expect that over the course of 15 or 17 or 16 games, actually, since we made the trade, that there would be huge movement in our statistics. Taking a look at the pitching staff, we know that Ohtani was an all-star. Painter, we're not going to do anything with. Susanna having a nice debut year for us. Yinger, kind of an off year for him. And Sullivan's been respectable. Couple guys that are really struggling in the bullpen. Nick Hernandez, who we picked up as a Rule 5 acquisition. 10 home runs allowed in 39 and a third innings. Clearly, that is a major problem. His SIERA is excellent at 2.02, but he struck out 66 batters in 39 and a third innings, so that's been very impressive. But if you're giving up a homer every 4 innings, it's going to be pretty tough to be successful. And he's certainly been struggling. Miguel Segura is a guy that we claimed on waivers at the beginning of the year, and he's walked 17 batters in 31 innings pitched. Another guy whose SIERA is better than his ERA, but he definitely has not been excellent for us. Ji-Hoo Kim has been pitching better of late, but his SIERA of 4.56 is more in line with his ERA. He's a negative WAR player on the year. And then Emerson Talavera, the stats are not great, but he's been very unlucky. 4.32 BABIP against him. His SIERA is almost 3.5 runs lower than his actual ERA. Hasn't walked an inordinate amount of batters. He's given up some home runs, but I think it's primarily the amount of hits he's allowed through that insane BABIP. So would think that he would get better. Bryce Miller and Andres Munoz are probably the 2 best arms in our bullpen. Haven't put up the numbers that we would hope for, but the SIERA for Munoz is a run better than his ERA. Relatively small sample size. And in Bryce Miller's case, his SIERA is almost a run better than his ERA. He's given up a lot of hits. But the 3.55 BABIP, you would think that would probably be a little lower by the course of the end of the year. So there's definitely guys for us to, since I'm just focusing on the bad, Adrian Morejon and Kyle Backus, the 2 lefties, continue to be pretty productive when they have been on the mound for us. But certainly could look to potentially try to help the back end of that bullpen. Don't have really any money to do it with. So that is going to make it challenging, but we will see if there's anyone on the market that maybe can help us. And we've put the feelers out on a couple of the top relievers available. Looks like we've got a no way and an almost. Colorado, we had offered Nick Hernandez, the veteran who we picked up in the Rule 5, who's given up the insane amount of home runs for us. Offered him for BJ Montoya, offered him and BJ Montoya, a minor league reliever, to the Rockies for Andrew Nardi. We needed them to keep 90% of his salary to fit him under the board, under the budget. And thought we might have a chance with him since he's going to be a free agent, but clearly no going with Colorado. Cleveland, we're at least in discussions, but they want a big-time player for us. We offered them Nick Hernandez to get Cade Smith. I actually thought Cade Smith might be more challenging to get since he's actually still arbitration eligible next year, so he would be a guy under our control for next season. Having a rough year this year after leading the American League in saves last year with 43. He's walked 23 batters in 35 innings pitched, 6.43 ERA. But on paper, with his 75 stuff, his 75 movement, his 50 control, and 3 outstanding pitches, would certainly be an upgrade over Hernandez. Not going to throw in one of these big-time prospects or big-time players to get it done. I think I will put Montoya into the trade. 19-year-old relief prospect who we picked in the 7th round a year ago, hasn't done much for us in rookie ball. I don't think that, I'm sure that will not get the deal done, but we'll see if it moves the dial at all in terms of what they want in return. My hunch is it probably will not move the dial too much, and we just might not be able to get something done this year. But we'll at least see what the Guardians think as we try to add a big-time arm to the back of our bullpen. And including Montoya, who is not a huge prospect. His stuff looks like it could be electric, and his fastball and his sinker both could be above average to excellent when all is said and done, but concern about his movement and control at the major league level, and he hasn't shown much thus far in rookie ball. Still looking for big-time players or big-time prospects. The one guy that I would consider giving up that would get the deal done is lefty Tyshawn Tenon. Picked him in the 7th round back in 2027. He's finally having a good season in rookie ball this year. Probably should think about potentially promoting him. 2.52 ERA, 3-1 record, working primarily out of the bullpen for us. He's at least respectable this year. But he's almost 21 years old, throws in the high 80s, and I just, looking at his potential stuff, it's hard for me to see him being a major league pitcher. He's the type of guy we like to have in our organization with that high work ethic, good influence on people around him, with that personality, but just don't see him as being a legitimate prospect to do anything at the major league level, with the fact that we think his stuff at best is a 35, and we don't think he's even going to be major league average with any of the 3 pitches that he's going to have. So looks like Hernandez didn't give up a home run in his last performance, so that's a small step in the right direction. But to be able to turn a Rule 5 pick, a decent relief prospect, and a very marginal starting pitching prospect into a potentially dynamic reliever. Over the course of his career, he's got a 147 ERA plus, a 79 FIP minus. It's just kind of all gone wrong for him this year. but his FIP minus is still not that far off of his career levels. His Sierra is still fine. The 383 BABIP is an issue. And it's fair to say to me that the 338 BABIP that Hernandez has given up is something that might improve also. But what I don't know will improve with Hernandez is the fact that he's got average movement. He's a fly ball pitcher that doesn't throw very hard, and he's given up 10 dingers in 40 and 2/3 innings after giving up 7 in 37 and 2/3 last year. I think that Cade Smith's ratings certainly look better, and his accomplishments over the course of his career are certainly better, even though his performance this year hasn't been great. I think you can make a better argument that a ground ball pitcher who throws in the low to mid 90s with great movement on his pitches is going to continue to give up a lot fewer home runs than Hernandez did. So because I don't view Montoya or Tenon as huge prospects, and we are in win now mode, we are going to go ahead and complete this trade and hope that Cade Smith can bolster our bullpen. Got a nice little boost to fan interest from him being on board, so we're at least back to 100. And not the most exciting transaction in the world, but we're in win now mode and feel like that helps a little bit for the back end of our bullpen to bring Cade Smith on board. Don't love the fact that his arbitration number is going to be almost $7 million next year. You know, he may be a guy that we look to move on from this offseason, or perhaps if he does really well, you know, that gives us an incentive to give him the opportunity to be our closer, and maybe we think about moving on from Andres Munoz. But we'll see how everyone performs over these last 2+ months of the season as we try to remain competitive in the race to make the playoffs here in 2030. And although we lost the first game against Milwaukee to push our losing streak to 5, we did take the last 2 against the Brewers to salvage the series there. Now, as I mentioned, we're back home for the rest of the month, finishing up against the Dodgers and the Cardinals. Quick look at the standings as we approach the trade deadline. 8.5 out in the National League East, and we are 2.5 up for the final wild card spot. And we're now 3 games away from the trade deadline. We did take 2 out of 3 against the Dodgers, so you can see we're still 8.5 back, 3rd place in the NL East. And we are 3.5 up on the final wild card spot at this point. I don't think we're going to do too much else. We don't have a ton of capacity to do anything, and I don't want to go crazy, but do want to check in on some early returns. Cade Smith obviously has given up a couple runs since taking over as our closer, but 1-0 record with 2 saves, so he's got the job done, but in a fashion where he's allowed a couple runs to score on his watch. And his ERA plus and his FIP minus are both very strong, though, with 5 strikeouts over 3 innings. You know, hard to make much of an assessment on him, obviously, in that small sample size. More relevant, let's check in on our new center fielder, John Featherston. And he's hitting .288 in his first 73 at-bats, 5 doubles, a couple of homers, above average in terms of his OPS plus, WRC plus, WRAA, and he's already put up almost a full run of WAR for us. Take a look at his fielding stats. Obviously a small sample size here too, but his zone rating and his defensive efficiency are both above average, so hopefully he'll help. And his arm has obviously been good too, so hopefully he'll help stabilize that position for us a bit defensively. Jace Young is the other guy that we talked about potentially doing something with. Obviously hasn't hit a home run since the last time we checked in on him. The OPS plus, WRC plus, and WRAA all kind of trending in a negative direction. His WAR, I think he's lost a little bit there. So he hasn't been playing well over the last few weeks. Still don't know that we have any other obvious path that we can take at third base. I'll do another search, see if anyone's out there, but I don't think there's going to really be anything significant that we can execute on that front, unfortunately. Nick York finally having a down year with us, hitting just 240 in minimal playing time. And Jace Barofin hitting just 235 with 14 homers and 302 at-bats. They've both had their time impacted by bringing on Featherston, more so in the case of York. And then Rafael Rodillo definitely has had his playing time impacted, trying to get through the year at this point by keeping the Rule 5 guy on our roster, because we do think he is a potentially interesting bat as a corner outfielder down for us down the line. 278 average with 3 homers and 97 ribbies. So at the very least, we can say he's given us better production than what we got from Reyes before we traded Reyes away. And Rodillo is younger than Reyes as well. So I think that swap will ultimately work out for us decently, but it's going to really be dependent on what Featherston gives us in center field. And so far, the early returns are relatively favorable. And we really couldn't find anything to do on the third base front, so we are past the trade deadline, August 1st. We did take 2 out of 3 against St. Louis, so after that rough patch getting swept by the Orioles, we've won 3 series in a row to finish off the month of July. Taking a look at the standings here as we get ready for the final 2 months of the season, still third place in the NL East, 7 behind the Mets. And we are in the second wild card spot, 2.5 up on the fourth wild card spot. So made a little bit of progress in the standings over the course of this month. Basallo now ranks second in the National League in homers. Seifu leading the league in stolen bases. And still no pitchers among our league leaders for the Buffalo Wings at this point. Take a look at the team statistics here with the season about 2/3 over. The .576 winning percentage we had in July was the best that we've had all year, and you can see our winning percentage has improved every month of the season so far. So from that perspective, I think we can feel pretty good about our chances of potentially making the playoffs. Still rank 5th in the National League in runs scored, tied for 8th in runs allowed. Starter ERA improved to 3rd. Bullpen ERA still pretty mediocre, ranking 13th, and we're 11th in defensive efficiency and zone rating. So all of the issues certainly have not been fixed. We at least have winning records against both left-handed and right-handed pitching at this point, although we are 2 above Pythagorean expectations. So it hasn't been an incredible season for our Buffalo Wings by any measure, but the hope is that we've made a couple of moves, bringing on the center fielder Featherston, who combined this year is hitting .307 with 8 homers, .280 with 2 homers since we brought him on board, and bringing in Cade Smith, who in 4 games has a win and 3 saves, 8 strikeouts in 4 innings. So it seems like he's certainly delivering some electric stuff. Hopefully those 2 additions guarantee that this team will get in the playoffs. I think it's going to be a big chore for us to potentially get past both the Nationals and the Mets in the division. So we may be looking at a wild card season this year rather than a division title. So more of last year's path to the playoffs for us than potentially the path we took 2 years ago. But if we get into the playoffs, anything can happen. And we've got a team that I think is built to try to win now. As we talked about early in the episode, potentially may have to look to take off some salary and trade away a big player or 2 at the end of this season. So that's part of the reason we figured we would try to give it a run this year. I certainly don't think that these Wings need to go into a total rebuild, but it certainly is conceivable that all of our big money players may not be back with us next year. And if that's the case, we want to try to give it our all this year to get this team across the finish line. And taking a quick look at our minor league system with weeks to a month plus to go as far as the minor league teams this year. AAA Capitals above 500, AA Utica in second place, only a game and a half behind. High A Jamestown in second place, only 4 behind. Marathon hanging in close to 500. Rookie ball team in the FCL just above 500, and rookie ball team in the Dominican League continuing to dominate, driven by some veterans that we put on that team just to avoid them losing the majority of their games. So a much more balanced and respectable performance from our minor league system this year, which hopefully will help ensure that those players develop as well as they possibly can, because particularly if we do need to move on from a Rutschman or a Meyer or an Otani or a Painter or perhaps even a Basala who's going to start making some big money next year. Hopefully we've got the replacements in our organization to help ensure that even if we have to take a step back in terms of the players on our team, we're not going into a full rebuild mode and we can keep this team competitive. But that is talking about next year. Right now we are more focused on the next 2 months of this season, and we will see if we can guide this Buffalo Wings franchise back into the playoffs for a third straight year in our next episode. Until then, thanks so much for watching, and hope you have a great day.